Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Monday work session of the City Council. Ms. Jones, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager, items for council preview?
Sure. So for Thursday, we have a lot of public hearings. The first one has to do with the Matthew Whaley Elementary School learning cottages. A second one is for a special use permit for the Tidal Wave Auto Spa on Richmond Road. And then we have a whole host of public hearings to do with the budget. The first has to do with the first two have to do with ARPA funds, and then the next three are the budget and setting the rates associated with the budget. And then we have one action item, and that is to consider station alerting solution for the new fire station.
Thank you. So that takes us now to public comments, and I recognize that a lot of you are here for the presentation from VDOT, and so what I'd like to do is offer a second public comment portion after their presentation, and that way you can hear the presentation and then make comments based on that. And then you don't have to stick around till the end of the meeting for the final public comment. So with that, I'll open the floor for any public comments. Looks like we're all, and I do have some speaker cards, and I think they're all traffic-related VDOT. So we'll hold those until after the presentation. Okay, so then that takes us now to presentations, and the first one on the agenda is VDOT presentation on HR 05 Project Pipeline Route 199. Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Again, I'm Aaron Small, City Engineer. With me today is Chad Tucker. He is from the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment from the Commonwealth, Virginia. And he's going to talk about the Project Pipeline HR 05 on Route 199. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Tucker. Appreciate you coming in today.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. All right, Project Pipeline effort. Again, my name's Chad Tucker. The last 7 or 8 years, I've run the Smart Scale program for the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and our office works directly with the Secretary of Transportation. And I wanted to give you all a little bit of background about what this Project Pipeline effort is, what its focus is, you know, what we're trying to accomplish through it. So really, it's a study program. It's meant to provide additional resources to localities and regions to help go through a very deliberate, data-driven planning process to come up with potential solutions that the locality can submit for either funding through the state or funding through regional sources or federal sources. This first inaugural run started last summer. We started up the program, and I've got a little timeline that'll go into that in more detail. But we essentially started up 45 studies across the state, 5 in each construction district. And the Route 199 study was one of the studies identified in the Hampton Roads district by the then CTB member, Mr. Malvin. And it was based off of, you know, feedback that he had been getting over the years, as well as the VTrans effort showing that there are a significant number of challenges that face the corridor that we would want to address. And so we spent the first couple months really standing up the program and developing the tools that we would use to help us understand what were causing the problems, and so that we could identify targeted investment strategies that would sort of address those specific issues. And so the Project Pipeline is really based on a philosophy called performance-based planning, which starts off, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And so this corridor was identified as a priority VTrans need through the Commonwealth Transportation Board due to a number of overlapping needs that exist along the corridor, including corridor preservation and safety. Once you determine there is a need, if you can prevent the breakage from occurring, you know, do that. So how do we preserve and protect the assets? How do we preserve the capacity of the corridor? Are there ways that we can do access management to allow the existing capacity to operate in an optimal fashion? And then if it is broke, can we fix what we have? So all of this really centers around, are there things that we can do without sinking major capacity expansion and widening, which, as you know, could have a significant community impact. And once you've done that, then you can consider a new one. So think of it like a check engine light on your car. You've got queues that are backing up from the signals, you've got crashes that are occurring, and a typical process could go, well, let's build new lanes, or let's build a grade separation, or let's build a new roadway. And really what we're trying to do is say, we've got a problem, let's diagnose and understand what's causing the problem so that we can test different solutions, some of which may be more targeted, more cost-effective, and would allow us to reduce the impacts to the surrounding community. So this timeline that you see here, we really broke the studies up into three main phases. The first phase was standing up the data systems that we were going to use to analyze each of the 45 study locations. And we really started around in August getting into the diagnostic phase of what is causing the crashes, what's causing the capacity and the backups that we're seeing along the corridor. There was some field work that was done in November. And this first phase, and I do want to express my apologies to the public. I had to make a call last fall, and I own this decision wholeheartedly, of we initially would do a public engagement phase and a public meeting in the first phase to sort of get from the community, do we understand what is causing these problems? Do we have a full picture and a full understanding of the challenges? And there's no better way to validate your analysis than to talk to the people that drive the corridor each and every day. But I had to make a decision, and I made a decision to postpone the public engagement until we got into phase 2 where we had some alternatives. And I think in hindsight, it would have been very helpful to have had that early engagement with the public so that we could hear from the public what some of the challenges are, and we could also better explain what we were trying to target in some of the alternatives that we developed. So phase 2 is that alternatives refinement, coming up with a suite of potential things that we could do with public engagement, and that was the recent MetroQuest survey that we sent out. We did do targeted Facebook advertising, so it would show up in people's feed, and you'll see the numbers here in a minute. This study of all 45 got the most public comments back of by far of any of the 45 studies that we've done throughout the state. And the original game plan was this would all culminate in this spring, summer, something that the city could consider submitting for the next round of Smart Scale. Based on the public feedback that we got for this study, we're recommending that we extend the public engagement period and we work with the public to try to come up with solutions that the public can endorse and can support. So we are calling a little bit of an audible, if the city supports us in that decision, of really extending the phase 2 and doing more public engagement and public outreach over the summer. In no way is this something that the state, through Smart Scale, the state cannot submit improvements. It has to have the support of the city. And so I just want to stress that. We heard from the public, and what we heard told us that we need to do more engagement. A quick overview of the location. So we're essentially looking at Route 199 at the 3 remaining signals along that otherwise limited access facility. And it started on the western end at intersection of John Tyler Highway, includes the intersection of John Tyler Highway and John Tyler Lane. It includes the intersection of 199 and Jamestown Road. And then on the eastern side, you've got the Brookwood Drive signalized intersection. These are the VTrans needs that were identified in the state multimodal plan. There's bicycle access needs, there's capacity preservation and congestion mitigation. There's also need to improve pedestrian access, and there's also need for safety improvements. The 2 biggest needs are the capacity preservation and the safety improvement. Those were identified as the highest priorities along this stretch of 199. The existing conditions data review, so there's a number of different data sources that we have access to. This is 2019 NRICS data. We specifically chose that because it was before the pandemic, which is more indicative of what you're going to see now that things have recovered But essentially, the reductions in speed start in the morning, and they pretty much persist throughout the day at this location within the study area, and then start to recover, after 5 p.m., the speeds start to go back up. Sometimes you'll see, it recover during lunchtime and then would dip back down, but this is pretty much a slow decline that occurs gradually and continuously throughout the day. Some of the safety data review, so the John Tyler Highway intersection is ranked 47th in the Hampton Roads District from a safety standpoint, and the Jamestown Road intersection is ranked 17th. So there are a number of safety challenges that exist, and that was one of the things we were looking at when we were developing the alternatives, is not only how do we reduce congestion, but how can we improve the safety along this corridor. A number of the crashes can really be attributed to the congestion. When you see a pretty high percentage of rear-end crashes occurring, that typically is a trend that you'll see when you've got a lot of queuing that's occurring. People aren't expecting to stop, they run into the back. 2 crashes involving bicycles and 1 pedestrian fatality up at John Tyler Highway. Another interesting trend was at John Tyler Lane, the intersection of that and John Tyler Highway. About 60% of the crashes are occurring during rainy conditions, which suggests that the visibility and perhaps the pavement, the slipperiness of the pavement is contributing to that. A number of right turn on red crashes, both at John Tyler Highway as well as on Jamestown Road, and that often is indicative of the side street traffic experiencing lots of delay, and they start to take more risk. They're looking for a gap, they've been waiting for a while, and they decide they can make it, and you'll start to see the right turn on red crashes start to have an uptick because of that congestion and friction that you have on the side street. So there was a field review that was done back in November. I'll highlight just a couple of things from the slides up here. The intersection here is at Brookwood Drive. So you've got the queue extending from Jamestown Road, extending through Brookwood Drive. And I've got a slide here in a second that'll show the actual queue lengths, but they're rather significant. So Jamestown Road is affecting the operations of Brookwood Drive. In the middle there, Route 199, you've got the westbound 199 queue at Jamestown Road, again extending through Brookwood Drive. And then at Jamestown Road, a number of pedestrian and bicyclists were noted during the field review going through this intersection as well as the one to the west, the John Tyler Highway. So here's a couple more pictures of the queuing that's occurring where the left turn bays, the queues are actually extending out and blocking the through traffic at John Tyler Highway. So just wanted to let you know that there was quite a bit of field work that was done to just not only to validate essentially what we were seeing in the data as far as the speeds and the congestion and the crashes. Here's one of the things to be aware of is Jamestown Road, that intersection is definitely driving the performance of these 3 intersections as a system. And while you'll see there at Brookwood a level of service C, really the queuing is backing up from Jamestown Road almost all the way to the bridge now over the creek. And we're anticipating in the next 20 years that queue is going to extend all the way to the Colonial Parkway. So improvements at these intersections, you had to consider, if I make traffic flow through Jamestown Road more efficiently, then I've got to make improvements at the next intersection, or else I'm essentially just transfer the problem from one signal to the next. And so that really played into the team's choices of what sorts of improvements, and a lot of the improvements are there ways that we can relocate turns in a way at these intersections such that we can reduce signal phases, which would allow us to give more time to the heavy movements, and it will allow us also to reduce conflict points. And when you reduce conflict points, you inherently make intersections safer because there's less conflicts for the traveling public to have to navigate as they're going through the intersection. So again, this is a summary of general feedback. We got almost 3,000 surveys were completed for this. To put that in perspective, other studies throughout the state, we were averaging somewhere between 300 and 500 surveys. So definitely interest from the community in this survey. I believe there were a couple of news articles as well. And so, essentially what we heard is folks did not particularly care for the alternatives that were presented and actually indicated that no build is, So we feel that we need more time with the public to understand some of those concerns and spend some time refining those to see if we can address some of the concerns that they did have about the alternatives that were presented. So what we're recommending is really extending that phase 2, that public engagement phase, reaffirming with the surrounding community the needs, the challenges in the study corridor, and are there any adjustments or refinements that we can make to the improvements that would allow them to be more supportive of what, of a potential solution that the city can put forth for funding consideration. And that pretty much wraps up my presentation. I'll definitely take any questions that you have.
Well, Mr. Tucker, I appreciate you coming in and sharing with the community where you are with the project, and certainly I think everybody's somewhat relieved that you're extending this phase 2 opportunity, this period for the opportunity for more input and guidance from the community. And while I'm not a traffic engineer by any means, I think we all would recognize that public safety is paramount, and we all would support measures to make that happen. The concern is the collateral effect of what happens in and around the areas, particularly as you come in onto Jamestown Road, with roundabouts and additional roadways and that type of thing. And I'm sure the community is going to speak to that as well. When you say you're going to extend this phase 2 opportunity, what's the timeline on that?
That essentially would be through this summer, with the hope being that sometime by the end of the summer, we've got a investment strategy that we can recommend and that has the support of both, the city council and the county board, but also the surrounding communities. So I would anticipate this would be about a 4 to 5 month extension of the study.
And so I think I understand, as you move through this phase 2, hopefully together we can find a solution. Either the city or the county has to put forward the funding plan for this, for the smart scale funding?
Yes, the city and or the county would have to submit the application for funding through the state. The way the Commonwealth Transportation Board set up smart scale is the state is not an eligible applicant. So, and really the reason for that policy decision was so that the state's not pushing solutions that don't have broad local support. And that you have that local support because, the locality is essentially the entity that is able to submit it for funding.
Well, I'm sure Vice Mayor and others might have some additional questions. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Tucker, and I also appreciate the fact that you're willing to extend this phase 2 to give the public more time to provide input and with the city reach some kind of alternative that's acceptable to everyone. I was a little curious when I saw that for someone who travels that corridor quite often, that 23 miles an hour, I mean, I've been there at the peak times, the 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and maybe early in the morning, but not doubting the study, but I found it interesting that 23 miles an hour through a majority of the day to travel that corridor from John Tyler to Brookwood. And also agree with what you said about, when you make the Jamestown Road light and then you've got a Brookwood light as well, and it causes it to back up and you end up all the way through John Tyler. And looking at some of the, and as the mayor stated, I'm not a traffic engineer, but looking at some of the alternatives that were presented, I think it was curious to me how additional stoplights on 199, would make that flow better.
It does seem, I agree, counterintuitive. But essentially what you're doing, like at John Tyler Highway, there's a displaced left is proposed. What that allows is typically your left movement from 199, your through movement in the other direction has to stop. By doing the displaced left, you're able to take advantage of that traffic stopping, get your lefts over on that side, and then they can occur at the same time. So it really is allowing you to take from a particular signal phase and give more time. And so, like with an R cut or displaced left, you are adding an additional signal, but the signals are coordinated in a way that they operate as one unit. So what we've seen in Northern Virginia and Richmond and other places where these innovative intersections have been installed is both a significant congestion benefit as well as a reduction in the crashes that occur. One example I'll give out in the Blacksburg area, we put in this restricted crossing U-turn. There haven't been any injury or fatal crashes in the 3 years since, and before they were having 5 or 6, a year. So they do have significant safety benefits as well as congestion benefits. But it is something that, the public, we got to work with the public, and they've got to understand, why they work the way they do. And there are enhancements that we can do to those to sort of minimize some of those impacts to the surrounding community. And so hopefully that's what we can do over the next 3 or 4 months.
And I think as the mayor stated, we all agree that safety is a priority. And kind of a follow-up to the mayor's question about extending the public input, say we reach, everyone's comfortable with an alternative, you apply for the funding. What does a timeline look like for some
Implementation
of that plan?
Typically you're looking at, if the project were to go in this round and it were to make it in the 6-year improvement program next spring, you're essentially looking at probably 7 years down the road before it's actually constructed and built. Because you're adding it to essentially to the 5th year of the 6-year improvement program, because you've got projects that you're already working on. There have been some opportunities to accelerate project schedules, starting in the 3rd year. So sometimes, you may see something as soon as 4 or 5 years down the road. But typically it's around a 6 to 7 year period from when it gets funded to when we're actually doing construction. Because you got to get through the PE phase, you got to get through the right-of-way phase.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So the last project I think we're all aware of was the rotary that was constructed on Long Hill Road. How long did that project take?
I would have to defer to the district. I do know the Long Hill Road project. What little I know about it is a widening. It also involves a roundabout, and it was based off of a study that James City County led back in 2014. So James City County developed that study, and I believe put that in for Smart Scale 2 rounds ago. And so that was one I believe the district was able to accelerate fairly quickly. I believe the roundabout's been recently built.
And I'm specifically concerned about the construction time, the impact to the residents going through there. How long was the construction period for that?
I'm not sure, sir.
Does anybody in the room might know that?
Jerry, you know? 2 years.
2 years. So 2 years to do one rotary. So when I saw in the survey, it noted that taking Jamestown Road 199 intersection as an example, it noted that the project could save 40 seconds during congestion for a price of up to $20 million on one of the solutions. It did not state how long the project would take and how long the disruption for congestion during the project would be, which I would expect would be minutes rather than seconds.
Yeah, I believe when it was one of the intersections, it was around 38 seconds. So you're looking at about 4,500 vehicles that are entering during the peak period. So that equates to about 58 hours in one day and 1 p.m. peak hour. that you're saving the traveling public. Because remember, it's an average. So there are going to be certain movements that are going to be experiencing quite a bit more delay reduction. It's as a whole, every person entering that intersection is experiencing about 40 seconds less delay. So you add that up every day, AM, PM, Monday through Friday, each week, and that's actually a very significant amount of travel time savings. Now, with any construction project, you're going to have maintenance of traffic issues and all. And I know one of the challenges here in the Hampton Roads region is no one wants to do construction during the summer. That's tourist season. So it is a little bit of a challenge, I think, for the Hampton Roads District of trying to balance those needs of keeping the roads open during construction season, which typically occurs in the summer, and trying to minimize those impacts to the surrounding, the movement of tourists and all. So I suspect that may have played a role in the roundabout project, but I'm not completely sure. I suspect if the construction recently completed, it sounds like they did a really early spring to try to have it done before the tour season kicks in full swing here in the summer.
So for that average driver that's going to save 40 seconds in congestion at the end of the project, how much time is going to be wasted during the project, and how many years will the project take?
Sir, that would really depend on, how the project is implemented from a construction standpoint. It's certainly what we're proposing could be done within a season, one construction season. But again, there's a lot of things that have to be balanced. As you know, Jamestown Road, coming from Colonial Williamsburg down to Jamestown, there would probably be a desire to limit the hours of construction to nighttime or to do it in early spring, late summer. But I would not think it would take more than 2 years.
So 2 years of disruption for everybody that lives in that area. And nighttime construction, which will not be very good for the residents that live next to Jamestown Road.
This is true.
So I think that I predicted that probably is not going to be much support from the residents of Williamsburg for putting a rotary on Jamestown Road in the city. But now that we've got VDOT's attention on how we can maybe come up with cost-effective solutions, because a lot of these solutions, it almost looks like, the cure is worse than the cold in terms of what you'd have to go through to save 40 seconds. But now that we've got your attention, is that this a good time for you to look at where could we add cost-effectively a couple left-hand turn lanes to free up our traffic? And the intersections that come to mind would be Compton coming out of William and Mary from Kaplan Arena onto Monticello, and then also being able to have a right-hand turn lane off of Strawberry Plains Road onto John Tyler, so that the traffic could be flowing a lot more, because right now those are single lanes leaving, and you have to, anybody who wants to go right has to wait for the other people to turn left or go straight on those intersections. In terms of safety, I think that, and maybe Chief Snyder has more information, but it seems to me our most recent fatality intersection was at Monticello and Ironbound. I mean, that was a huge accident there with fatalities.
Yeah, there have been in the last so between 2015 and 2019, there have been 113 injury crashes and one fatality, and that was at John Tyler Highway.
Yeah. What about in terms of bike safety? One of the intersections I've noticed, I think this is a VDOT intersection, Trayburn and Monticello. Is that VDOT? So if you're riding a bike on Trayburn towards William and Mary School of Education, there's no way on a bike to trigger that signal. Is there some way you could improve that? Because the bike's going to sit there all day until a car comes to get that signal to trigger.
Yeah, there are signal systems. They're video actuated, as well as there are loop detectors that can be put down if you've got a number of bicyclists using a corridor, and then that would then trigger the light so that they can go. So that certainly is an operational improvement that could be considered at those locations.
And another thing that we talked about you talked about the rear end collisions. In other jurisdictions, one of the ways that they prevent those is have signaling devices right before the light's going to be starting to turn. So coming, down 199 at 45 miles an hour, wherever you are, then you should start applying the brakes. You get that signal in advance.
Yeah.
Is that something that we can be putting in?
I think that would have limited applicability here. Where I've seen that is typically on a rural roadway that doesn't have signals for a number of miles, and then you have a signal, and you'll have that sort of advanced red light flashing beacon to warn folks, hey, there's a signal coming up, you need to be prepared to stop. The issue here is the queuing is extending quite a significant way away from the signal. And so the public's not, they may know there's a signal coming up, but they're not expecting a queue 800 feet back from the signal. And so when you have those long queues extending almost out of visibility of the signal, that's when you can really, so I think you can have congestion ahead warning. I've seen that in instances where traffic will back up significantly from a signal. But the most effective way is to really try to reduce those queues to the best of your ability so that, they're not extending so far back from the signal.
Okay, thank you. Barb?
Thank you again for coming and making the presentation. I think everyone is pleased to know that there will be additional time for conversation and engagement. And also the fact that Smart Scale has benefited the city for past projects, and so we have appreciated VDOT partnering with us on various projects in the past, and are glad that we'll have that opportunity again. So just a couple questions, because like the mayor said, I definitely am not an engineer of any sort. And so when you're talking about the queuing and tracking where the cars are and back up here and there, have you all sort of investigated where that traffic is coming from? To the point where is it coming from, the county into 199 and then going sort of east and west? Or because there's obviously been a number of new housing developments, and with 64 widening, we know that we have more people living here and traveling. Yeah. And to Councilman Maslin's point about construction, I think we've all lived through construction disruptions, such as with I-64, but now that it's all done, it's like, that wasn't so bad. We all get through it, whatever it is, and so whatever would come from this, we would. But anyway, back to my question, as far as where the traffic is coming from, or is it coming more from the city out to 199 and then spreading that direction?
So I don't believe that origin destination analysis was specifically one of the things that we looked at, but that is something that we have tools that will allow us to say, for traffic coming through and entering the study corridor, where are they going in the area? There are some data sources that the state purchased several years ago that allow us to make, travel behavior, maps to understand, where is the demand coming from that's driving the numbers. We sort of indirectly did look at that from the traffic counts and all that were going, as far as number of people going through versus making left. So we know where our heavy movements are, but that's certainly something that we could look in this extended phase, is have a better understanding of where the traffic's coming to and from. And you can do that both in the AM peak as well as the PM peak.
Because it seems that a number of the alternatives would more impact city residents, whether it be there on Jamestown Road and John Tyler Lane, but it may be that the cause of the congestion is coming from others that wouldn't be impacted so much from some of the alternatives. And if you do these things, but then in 20 years there's that much more traffic, then is the plan then that you would go to additional intersections, or do you have like a 20-year phase 2 project, or
So one of the things that was intriguing to me as a planner when we were discussing with Mr. Malbin and the possibility of studying this corridor is I have been with VDOT long enough to know that grade separation has been proposed here in the past, or it's been considered in a planning sense. And there was quite a bit of community backlash at the time years ago when that was looked at, of just the community impacts at Jamestown Road alone. You've got development in all four quadrants, like how would that work? What would that do to the surrounding businesses and the surrounding community? And so we saw this as an opportunity there are interim things that you can do that will greatly extend the life of the corridor through the types of improvements that we were proposing. And we sort of saw that as an opportunity, so, a test bed, if you will, of being able to do some of these solutions that will get you much of the capacity of a grade separation, but with a much reduced cost. So a grade separation at one of these, you're probably looking somewhere in the order of 70 to 80 million per intersection to do, grade separate, versus, 20 million collectively for the targeted sort of intersection improvements. So that's really what we were going to this with the goal of, are there things that we can do within the existing at-grade signals that would allow us to improve efficiency, not only for 199, but for Jamestown Road. There's quite a bit of side street queuing that occurs on these side streets, which was indicative in the field review photos that we showed. So is that gonna be the ultimate solution for the next 40 years? Probably not, but it certainly would improve operations and safety there for the next 20 to 25 years.
And I'm sure that any residents of the Holly Hills carriage homes can testify to the queuing backup that creates problems for them coming in and out of Brookwood too. So there was one other question I was going to ask you. Well, we talked about the backup. Oh, I know. So you said that during this next phase of public engagement, you'll look at other alternatives. What if no one likes those additional alternatives?
I mean, a perfectly acceptable outcome of this study will be the preferred alternative is the no-build.
Nothing.
Is to leave things as they are. Then that's going to have to be with the understanding that things, based on the trends that we're seeing, you're going to see the crashes go up significantly. You're going to see the queues that are experienced today to get even longer in the future. And so I certainly wouldn't recommend that, but that certainly is an acceptable outcome, is to just say, none of the solutions that we've come up with are acceptable. We did get some feedback asking about grade separation. Why didn't we consider that as one of the options?
What is grade separation?
Grade separation would be essentially turning it into an interchange, like the other downstream intersections, where you would fully,
Monticello.
Jamestown Road would be a bridge going over 199, and you would have essentially an interchange there. Versus at grade is what you have today, which is a signalized movement. My apologies.
And the other thing I should note is, who does 199 sort of belong to, as far as, you said it would be up to the city or the county or a combination to put in a request for this, for any changes?
I think the uniqueness of this one, we were definitely working with the staff from both the city and the county, because this is, I believe, right up on so it could technically be submitted by either jurisdiction, but it would, if it extends into the other jurisdiction, it would require a resolution of support from that jurisdiction as well.
Okay, so one couldn't do it without the other?
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you.
Mr. Tucker, thank you for your presentation. It's clear how much is backing this up, including data and, as you said, some field studies. We also appreciate you hearing from the community and recognizing that maybe a little bit longer period should be taken before you move ahead with whether what's there now or something in the future. So I want to make sure we have time for public comment. I'll keep my questions short. How will, over the summer period that you said the public engagement is extended, will that just take effect to be a survey, or will you all do some meetings with HOA presidents, go into the communities? What would be the opportunities for people?
It would
to
act, we were
contribute?
actually proposing in-person meetings, starting with the homeowners association and, selecting a location, a central location here where folks can come to. We can have some displays, we can have some of our simulation analysis and all, and we can really have a discussion as far as what are the issues, what are the concerns with the different alternatives. Are there things that we can do to the alternatives to sort of mitigate some of the concerns that folks have? So I do think a future survey would be helpful to sort of compare and contrast to the results that we just got. But I think we need to get out into the community and have in-person meetings with the community.
Sure, I agree, and I think others would as well. Surveys can, you're right, be very helpful for data collecting, but they are just impersonal by nature. So being able to talk with people from your side too can communicate your thoughts of, in the future, the queues could be a little bit longer, and that might hurt folks in Holly Hills carriage homes as they try to come out of their community. So it works on both sides there. The final question was, on one stat you mentioned, John Tyler Highway 47th in Hampton Roads for safety. What's that out of in total?
So this is based on a metric called the potential for safety improvement. And what it does is it looks at similar types of facilities in the Hampton Roads district. So 4-lane divided facilities with between 20 and 30,000 vehicles a day. And we will, based on the average, say, well, on average, those types of facilities are experiencing this number of injury crashes, this number of fatalities, and then we compare the actual study corridor to what is expected. And any value greater than 0 indicates there's an excessive amount of crashes. What you're seeing here is just the ranking. So that PSI value, each segment or each intersection, we're able to use that safety value and rank the intersections based on how much excessive crashes are they experiencing above and beyond what you would anticipate statistically on average for that type of facility. And so whenever you get in the top 100, those are areas that the district traffic engineer and residency and all will pay particular interest, because those are sort of the top 100 intersections for the district and will often be the subject of studies like this to try to improve safety.
So if roads are especially safe, then do they have a negative score, or would they
Yes,
just be scored at 0?
If it's less than 0, then that indicates there's less crashes than would be expected, which
Okay.
suggests the road is safer than you would expect for that type of facility.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Well, just a follow-up statement. If we improve 64, go ahead and get the gap to 3 lanes. I think that it would improve some of the runoff of 64 down 199. I think that's a major problem. Maybe if we can get that done in the next 2 to 3 years, that would be helpful.
I believe I saw it as an application this round of Smart Scale.
Good.
Several applications this round of Smart Scale.
Well, Mr. Tucker, thank you for coming in. I know it's not always easy to come in before the public, but I appreciate you taking the time to do that. So appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, so as I said at the beginning of the meeting, I will offer a second public comment period to talk about this issue while representatives are still here, if they don't run out, and I don't think they will. So the first speaker's card I have is Michael Dallas. You'll come to the center podium and state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to about 5 minutes. Jones is going to keep the clock on you. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Mike Dallas, 100 Yorkshire Drive, just down the street here. So, I've been in the neighborhood for 16 years, and this time, the previous time, for 4 or 5 years, so I'm familiar with the area. And been here long enough to watch it grow and traffic get worse and worse week by week and month by month. There have been a lot of traffic and safety issues in the community, and I'd just like to say thank you to Mr. Trivette and to the Chief of Police here in Williamsburg for working with us, the HOAs and some of the citizens in the community to address some of those issues, which we have without construction. But that's what really works, and that goes back to the point I'm glad to hear that VDOT is willing to engage the public. Those of us who live here probably understand the problems as well or better than anybody that are in and out of the neighborhood every day. I was here when there was no 199, and after it was built, it seemed to have solved the problem, but it goes back to Ms. Ramsey's point. That is, as I watch this thing, it almost makes me wonder if 199 has become obsolete. And are we going far enough in our thinking when we talk about solving problems, or are we just putting expensive Band-Aids on the problem? So that's why I think it's going to be really important to engage those of us who live here and travel, especially the business owners who have to do business here, who have been killed by the pandemic for the last 2.5 years. And this is going to go right on top of that. And so I think we really have to worry about those things. So forming some sort of citizen business owner advisory committee to help bring the real issues to the table and to find common sense solutions and be transparent about it, I think really goes a long way. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dowse. The second speaker card I have is Barbara Markowski. Sorry if I'm...
Thank you. I'm Barbara Mrachkovsky. I live in the woods, 121 Woodmere Court. My husband and I have been in Williamsburg since 1976, and we were the first house built in the woods. So we've been around a long time. My comments really were going to follow up some of the comments from my neighbors, but since I came first, I'll kind of very briefly address some of those. Our concerns are that we are going to be solving a problem with a worse solution, as you said. And when I looked at the actual statistics, a lot of the information that was presented, especially in the slide that you have up there, addresses a problem of rear-end collisions, which is, I'm a statistician, so I actually worked some numbers. About 54% of all the accidents shown up there are rear-end collisions. You can say that they're because of congestion, which is part of the problem, but a good portion of that problem also is inattention. So basically, you have people who are not paying attention to what they're doing and are driving too closely. One of the proposals that we had, short-term at least, is to have more police presence at those locations in order to be able to resolve some of those problems. Some of the other issues that are addressed on those charts are angle accidents. That's the second largest cause of accidents. Third was side sweeping. Again, those are not things that are going to be resolved by left turn, or no left turn lanes, I should say, or not allowing left turns. Those are all going to be situations that are either going to be resolved by some of the proposals that you have already brought up of having notification further back, either along 199 or Jamestown Road, additional caution lights and things of that nature, which will in fact notify people that there's something coming up that you can resolve. Our concern is that you're going to be destroying Jamestown Road. You're going to be causing additional U-turns, et cetera, up 199 and various other places, which will cause rear-end accidents, will cause all of those other same circumstances that we're trying to address at this point. Our community, especially in that general area, tends to be a lot of young people and a lot of seniors. And when you start adding huge roundabouts and various other things, I think that's going to start causing far more issues than what we have even now, even in the mid to longer term. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Sherry Spellmeyer.
Sherry Spellmeyer. I live at 108 Yorkshire Drive in Williamsburg. I've been there 30 years. And I came here prepared to ask questions to better understand the proposals. And I think part of the feedback that Mr. Tucker and his organization got, one of the reasons they got feedback is the lack of communication Perhaps it was the lack of understanding, but I think part of it was the proposals, lack of confidence that the proposals would actually solve any problems that might potentially, as others have said, have created more problems. And so I was really pleased to hear that you are going to extend the time that would allow us to give feedback. But I'm not confident. What I didn't hear is how are they going to do that? How are you going to do that? How are you going to make sure? I don't think extending the time of the survey is going to solve the problem. You really need an opportunity, I think Mike Dallas was saying, to give our communities, I represent the HOA at Yorkshire, give our communities an opportunity to gather feedback from the people who live in our neighborhoods, talk to the organizations that are making the decisions, and understand what they're proposing. So that's my request of you. As these improvements come forward to you, please give us a chance to have some input before you approve anything.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next is Sharon Scruggs.
I'm Sharon Scruggs, 119 Woodmere Court in the city, and I want to thank you all for letting us have this opportunity. I live in the woods, which is going to be directly affected by this proposal, and I've looked at all of the videos from VDOT, and what I see is a computer model that looks great on the computer, but in reality doesn't meet what our community sees. And if I can give a couple of examples, I think safety is the very first, most important thing. So on Brookwood Drive currently, cars that are waiting to get onto 199 and turn left can stack very safely on Brookwood Drive. With the new proposal, someone coming from Brookwood Drive, the landing, the airport, the winery, the neighborhoods, would not be able to turn left to get to Jamestown Road. They would have to turn right, cross 2 lanes of traffic, get into a left turn lane to pull a U-turn into other oncoming traffic. If there's a light there, great, that's just stopping more traffic. And if that left turn lane for the U-turn is backed up, they're sitting in a through traffic lane with 45-mile-an-hour traffic coming at their rear end. So these are elderly people or tourists, visitors to our area who aren't familiar, and it could be a real problem. I also think that it actually can make traffic flow less efficient. If you're coming from the ferry and you want to go to the Chickahominy House, you have to come straight through, cross 199, go around the roundabout at Woodmere Court, go back across 199 so you can get to the Chickahominy House. That's 2 additional throughway crossings that you don't have now. So you're actually increasing that traffic. It's just shifting things. It's not really fixing things. And there are other examples of that. The quadrant proposal, which of course would directly impact our neighborhood and Yorkshire, there's already a quadrant. It's at John Tyler Highway to John Tyler Lane to Walsingham Academy. There's a light. That is the same as the quadrant that's being proposed basically to cut through Walnut Hills. I worry about the businesses that will be affected in this area. Business is really challenging for small businesses anyway. People go where it's convenient. To get to some of these small businesses, if it's an additional confusion, if it's additional time, they're gonna suffer. They really will. I think that there are some solutions, some alternatives. The traditional, what was suggested, thank you, Mr. Tucker, to extend the left-hand lane turns, double them up if you need to. A lot of the problem is that the stacking happens, the queuing happens because the turn lanes are overflowing into the through lanes. So you can't turn because, and that's what's blocking up. So increasing that, it's kind of the traditional fix, could possibly make a huge difference. I'm there all the time. I thought I was the only person that was here before 199 was built, but I've been living within a mile of that intersection for over 50 years. And this is really only a problem at rush hour. And this is not Northern Virginia traffic. These are 45-second, a minute and a half problems. I don't think anybody is really that concerned. as far as that goes when it's a $20 million fix to gain 45 seconds. I do see where the mini roundabout maybe at John Tyler Lane could be a good solution for that. It's already confusing. Not a big backup, but it might help. I think that closing off the entrance to CVS that's closest to 199 and forcing everybody into the bank driveway would make a big difference, because that's an area of confusion with people trying to turn left into the CVS there from 199. I mean, there are a number of things that could help make a big difference that don't involve this large scope of a restoration project. So I'm hopeful that this can be moved aside and other solutions pursued. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scruggs. So that's all the speaker's card I have, but certainly there's still opportunity for anybody else to come forward that wishes to speak. Okay. So seeing none, we'll move on from this agenda item. And again, thank Mr. Tucker and all the representatives from VDOT for being here, and certainly all the residents for coming in and sharing their thoughts. So that takes us now to item B on the agenda, which is presentation and update for new employee orientation, the Quest program model. Ms. Hicks, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Dawn Hicks, and I'm the Human Resources Director for the City of Williamsburg. And I will be talking with you today about a GIO that was assigned during fiscal year 20, and due to COVID was delayed until this year. That GIO is an update to our Quest program. Quest is an acronym for something the city places great value on. That is quality through education, service, and teamwork. It is a training program that all employees go through that was developed by a staff team under former city manager Jack Tuttle's leadership in 1995. Council's GIO tasked staff with identifying potential changes that will improve its relevancy for today. Why is Quest important? Williamsburg is a special place to live and work, and it's important to showcase the history, traditions, and places that make it unique. The emphasis of Quest is teamwork, whether it be between coworkers, interdepartmentally, or through the staff-citizen relationship. Recommendations from staff for enhancements to the program include offering the class more frequently. In the past, the class has been offered once annually. Now we hire a lot more frequently than we have ever in the past. Therefore, it's necessary to hold additional classes. The last class that was held was in 2019, and that was due to COVID as well. We currently have approximately 60 members of staff that have not attended Quest, so we do have some catching up to do. Staff feels it is necessary to lengthen the course for the additional team-building activities that we would like to add, utilizing our local resources such as Colonial Williamsburg programming and William and Mary facilities. Additional training sessions may be added that are relevant to our workforce today, such as diversity and inclusion, generational differences, and understanding different personality types and communication styles. We would also like to add a real-life, community-based project that would be assigned to the Quest class as a whole. This is a project that would go beyond the Quest class, that the participants of the class would work together throughout the remainder of the year. Again, the focus would be teamwork and leadership. An example of a real-life community-based project would be expanding the community garden at Waller Mill. Another potential example could be beautifying a neighborhood entrance. A real-life example, a real-life project that would allow the participants to work together and then see the fruits of their labor as they travel through the city. We're hoping the results of these enhancements will reactivate our culture of teamwork and leadership, will strengthen our relationships, and allow staff to understand Williamsburg on a deeper level than just their job, which would in turn solidify their commitment to quality of excellence that we are known for. What questions do you have?
Well, thank you, Ms. Hicks. So I remember I went through Quest when I first got on council 12 years ago now, and what I think it helped me understand was how all the departments really kind of, whether it's public works or fire, there's a synergy amongst everyone, and I am fearful that over the last 2 years of COVID and not having this Quest program, and certainly with all the new hires that we've had, just like everybody else has had, it's just been harder to have, keep and maintain employees, that offering this program and extending it and doing some of the things that you're talking about is a great way to help, an employee who thinks that you're just coming to work in the Public Works Department understand the value of everything else that happens in the city. Because ultimately, I do think it's the staff that bring us the uniqueness of Williamsburg and helps maintain the beauty of Williamsburg, and having a cohesive team is important. So I look forward to supporting this, and I know it doesn't require a vote, but certainly would encourage you all to move forward with that. And I don't have any questions, but thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks, and I too, having been through the program, value the importance of the program. And one thing that I always remembered from Quest is you're all fairly new employees at the time that you go through. You learn the value of the city operating as a whole, the history of the city, but more importantly, the next time you see that person out in the field, you've built a relationship with that person just from the Quest class. So I do believe it's extremely important, and with the changes that are being made, I think it's going to add even more value to the program. And I don't know, Mr. Trivette, I seem to recall that maybe at some point you mentioned maybe a shorter version of some type of Quest for employees that had already been through Quest to come back and maybe hit some of the highlights of the new program?
One of the things that we anticipate is that Ms. Hicks and her committee and the department heads that contributed have done such a good job of redesigning this that there will be a lot of interest for people to come back and take it again, particularly as departments have evolved. But also, one of the things that we plan to do with New Quest is do a better job of educating our employees on what the community offers and some of those unique community assets. So we're going to spend more time in colonial Williamsburg. We're going to understand what Busch Gardens does for us, those kinds of things, because that's part of being a Williamsburg employee, is understanding why people are here. And so, yes, I think that's a part of it. The other thing that we did talk about and we are going to do is there's sort of the boring parts of orientation, the benefits discussion and making those selections and how does time off work, those kinds of things. And so what we're doing is breaking that into two pieces. So there'll be the long-term Quest orientation, which really focuses on orientation and becoming a part of the culture. And then there will be a separate orientation period offered every month, I believe, for employees that have been hired in that month to come in and get that first briefing from the city manager and some others. So we're really doubling down on our opportunity to onboard people to the city because we're really focused on the culture.
All right, thank you.
One of the things I might suggest considering it would be a mentor program, maybe starting at a certain level, because I remember in one of the other cities I worked for as a division director, I was able to reach across major department lines and establish a mentorship with a senior executive in the utilities group. And it really helped in terms of, coordinating projects, across department lines and cutting through the silos. And I think that maybe establishing a pilot with some type of mentor program would really be helpful.
So that's actually something that we have talked about doing with our new employee orientation program. So I might reach out to you and borrow some notes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, and appreciate all the work that you and your team have done on this to revitalize Quest. And personally, I'm hoping that city council members will be invited to meet the new employees as well, whether through some session of Quest, or if you have a meal, or some type of engagement, it would be nice to be included in that.
Absolutely, that's a nice idea. Thank you.
Six, thanks for this presentation. It's always great to see you. I think the onboarding period for anyone joining a locality or a company or nonprofit is so important to establish what the culture is and to break down some of the barriers between departments. So I'm really glad to see that we are reinvigorating Quest. I also got to be a part of it when I was interning with the city and had a lot of fun that day. I got to, I think, have one of my best days in Williamsburg after learning all about the police headquarters. We ended up over at the range that you all have, and I ended up meeting a neighbor of mine, Investigator Craig Hill, as he was helping me shoulder a rifle. And it was just a very unique way to meet people, and including getting to go through the class with Director Dameron and others. So I've seen some of the good Quest has firsthand, and I know how important the onboarding process is, no matter where you are starting at this company or a locality or elsewhere. So I'm excited to see us restart Quest, especially as 60 employees having gone through it. It's a major part of our workforce. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Takes us to item C, the presentation and discussion concerning the FY23 City Manager's proposed budget. Mr. City Manager?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So what we'd like to do today is present the FY23 budget, and we're going to focus the presentation really on the content of the budget message, because that's sort of the executive summary of the overall budget document, which is over 400 pages. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at that, and this will sort of be a covering of that for you in person. Before we begin, I do want to say that I think the staff is particularly proud of this budget because of the collaboration that went into putting it together with City Council at its first draft. That's not something that we often do. It's normally limited to the city manager's proposed budget, but this year we had some options, and I wanted to make sure that we were positioning the budget in the best way for you and for the community. And I think one of the reasons that we're proud of the outcome is because what this budget represents. It really represents the opportunity to accomplish a tremendous amount for our small city to set us up for future years. And so I think that if we're careful and manage the budget wisely as we move forward from this, we're really looking at a period of prosperity with the city's budget. So, of course, it wouldn't be a Drew presentation if we didn't have a colorful dancing timeline. So I want to start with how did we get here to illustrate the amount of work that goes into this. So, really this begins in October, continues in earnest throughout the Christmas season when we do the budget reviews with the departments and they submit their needs, and then we produce our budget based on that. We match those needs to revenues, and that determines what we are able to do or not do. One of the things that we're going to see in a few minutes is, of course, the slides that I like the best are the ones that show what's included in the budget and the one that shows what's not included in the budget. And if you look back and compare budgets over the last few years, particularly that sheet that says what's not included, you can tell that over the years, the bullet points have gotten fewer and fewer and fewer. And to me, that's a measure of success in any fiscal program for a locality, because we're biting away at those things that the organization needed and getting down to sort of those big items that are harder to swallow, or just dealing with what would be annual occurrences. And so we'll talk about that when we get there. So where are we now? We're in April, where we're talking about the budget review. We'll begin the adoption process, targeting May for that. And then, of course, we move out of the budgeting process and into the execution phase, the implementation of the budget. And then, of course, all throughout the process, there's a whole host of opportunities for the community and the public to participate. So the summary of this year's budget is really pretty simple. It's the same number of funds. You can see them there on the right, the general fund through the quarter path fund, the QCDA. One of the things that people would notice if they compared last year's budget to this year's budget is the total difference between the two budget numbers. It's substantial. There are two reasons for that. Number one is we do have a lot of new projects in the CIP that are budgeted, including some major infrastructure projects, but also the receipt of federal relief is also augmenting that number. And so it's sort of an artificially inflated budget number for this year. Next year it will likely return to a somewhat normal number, although we will receive a second tranche of the ARPA funding next year, which will make some difference. Probably the two biggest headlines of this year's budget is the fact that we are able to reduce the tax rate, the property tax rate, by 2 cents from 64 to 62. And we're going to talk about that in detail when we get through the budget side, particularly as we talk about the CIP, and also act on a recommendation from the Commissioner of Revenue to reduce the assessment ratio for personal property tax by 20%. And at this point, I'd like to call Commissioner Overy up to let her talk to the City Council about that.
Welcome,
Thank
Commissioner.
you. Thank you. Good to be here. Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. I had prepared a presentation, which I don't believe will be put up today, so I have copies that I'll be glad I can give them to you now if you'd like. Okay. So over the last 2 years, vehicle values have escalated due to the COVID-19 pandemic. New vehicle inventory is down because of a computer chip shortage, and used vehicle inventory is down because the rental companies and individuals were not able to purchase new vehicles, which limited the number of used vehicles being traded on the market and added to the overall shortage. So for that reason, the supply and demand has caused assessed values to rise significantly over the past 2 years. And we are, according to J.D. Power, anticipating that those inflated assessments are going to come back down at the end of this year or beginning of next year. And for that reason, I just thought it'd be helpful to share a little bit of information about the assessments year over year. In 2021, we saw an increase of 24% in the values over our 2020 assessments, and that's comparing the vehicles that we had in 2020 that with the same vehicles in 2021. So I did the same this year when we received our assessments from J.D. Power, and we are seeing a 26% increase this year over last year, which was already a 24% increase. The total number of vehicles that we looked at were 4,500, over 4,500 vehicles, and 97% of those vehicles had an increased value. So one thing I wanted to mention also is we now refer to the assessment program that we use as J.D. Power. They purchased NADA. So in the past, you've heard me refer to the National Automobile Dealers Association, but they have now merged, and J.D. Power is the tool that we're using going forward. So what does this all really mean? Well, it means that the tax bills went up last year. The tax bills are going to go up significantly this year, and all of that compression creates an increase in the tax bill, but also a reduction in the personal property tax relief that we receive from the state. So the whole state has been looking at this, and our association has been trying to address different ways and identify different ways that we can address this challenge. I thought also it would be helpful to explain to you the personal property car tax relief. We receive a limited amount of funds. It's a fixed amount that we can use every year to assign to the vehicles that we assess, personal property vehicles. And that money can only be used to offset personal use vehicles, so business vehicles are not included, and the relief is only available on the first $20,000 of the values. So as those values increase, the PPTRA naturally has to decrease because it's a fixed amount. In 2021, the car tax relief dropped from 47% to 38%, and without any action, the PPTRA rate would have to drop from 38% to 24% this year. So earlier this year, I made a recommendation, and several provided several options for you all to consider this year. And those options included doing nothing and allow the tax bills to stand at 100% value, or you can reduce the tax rate, or finally, we found an opportunity that in the state code 58.1-3503, section B, allows for the local governing body with the agreement of the Commissioner of Revenue to set the ratio of the assessed value. Our methodology has always been to assess at 100% of the clean loan value, and but because we have this ability to change that assessment, I am recommending that we discount our assessment ratio this year to 80%. And again, I think this recommendation is just for 1 year because we do anticipate that the value of the vehicles will return back to a more normal amount in the next year. So there are a couple of advantages to reducing the valuation of assessment. PPTRA percentage will not drop as significantly with the reduced assessment ratio methodology. The 80% valuation of assessment will be provided to all vehicles valued by J.D. Power, and so that will alleviate an unprecedented short-term tax burden. And finally, business vehicles will receive some of that relief because they are not eligible for the PPTRA. So there's just a couple other things that I thought I would point out to you. There was a little bit of misinformation in the notification that went out about this reduction. Not all personal property is included. This is only on vehicles that are valued by J.D. Power. So business, tangible personal property, business equipment is not going to be eligible. We use a different methodology. We use a cost basis ratio methodology. And also items like trailers, some boats are not valued by J.D. Power, so those would not be included. They have a different methodology, as well as other property, just random pieces of property that we have to assess, and we have a manual calculation for that. So those things, the 80% ratio won't be applied to those, just for the vehicles that are assessed by NADA. And then, again, just to point out that this request is only for 2022, and that one of the questions we've received in the last week, a number of people have contacted our office wanting to know if this methodology reduction is going to affect their PPTRA, and we've explained that it only affects their PPTRA in the sense that they're going to get a higher PPTR rate. It's not going to replace that. So I think that's it. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, I don't have any questions necessarily, but I'm certainly pleased that you worked with your staff to get this information and make this recommendation, and working with Barbara Dameron to get this into the budget, I think. I mean, that is an unprecedented, I think to use your words, increase in valuation. I mean, it's just phenomenal to think that some of these used cars have gone up like they have, and we've talked offline about that. And thank you for pointing out that, because it is important for all the taxpayers in the city to know that this doesn't affect business personal property. It's only the vehicles.
And it won't. And again, just to reemphasize, there are vehicles that are more than 20 years old that aren't valued by NADA. We already do a flat reduction every year, and so their values did not increase. So we aren't going to we aren't going to lower their values significantly if they're not included in that J.D. Power evaluation.
No reason to think that business personal property values have increased during this period of time.
No.
I mean, do you have a different calculus for that?
Yeah, so with business personal property, it's the cost basis. So the equipment that was purchased 10 years ago, we take 30% of that value of the original cost. And so as long as it's not new equipment that was purchased this year, their assessment is going to basically stay the same. So new equipment will be higher, but that's inflation, and that's just sort of the way.
Always the case.
Exactly.
That's why I don't buy a new desk. Well, thank you again, Commissioner. I appreciate you coming forward today.
Yeah, I have no questions. Thank you.
Great.
Hey, thanks. Good news. Can you remind us how this personal property tax affects leased vehicles? Is the person who's leasing the vehicle paying that, or is it the owner who owns the vehicle?
So leased vehicles are, each leasing company writes within their contract for anyone who leases, whether or not they pay it or the customer pays it. So it just depends on the company, and but ultimately, the tax bill is sent to the leasing company, and it is up to them to, go by whatever their agreement is with their leaser.
So if they do have that type of agreement, and the bill goes to them, is the lease vehicle considered a business vehicle or not?
No, so we go by how it is registered in the DMV.
Okay.
And so leased vehicles, the companies will designate with the DMV whether it's for personal use or business use. And that's how we determine whether or not they receive PPTRA.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think everyone has said everything and asked pertinent questions, so I just appreciate your diligence in pulling all this information together.
Certainly, thank you.
I echo that, Commissioner Overy. Thank you for months ago reaching out to council about this and trying to work towards a solution to slightly abate as we can the tax bill that some of our constituents will see. One question I had, we received a presentation from Mr. Green in our other meeting that said the average assessed value of housing has increased by about 12% this year. And you've said it's been 50% over the last 2 years of vehicle value. Is there a normal amount that would be from a 2018 to 2019 that we've now skyrocketed past?
Okay, I'm pulling numbers out of the top of my head, but I think it's somewhere between 4.5% and 5%.
Wow.
Year over year. So when we were looking at the recommendation for the ratio, I tried to make sure that we had that consistent small increase year over year, but not at 26%. One of the other things, when we look at the budget item, it is higher than the 5%, but that's because we have a new database with Tyler, and we converted all of our personal property into that database this year. And in that process, we have a way now of uploading DMV reports directly into our system. And we have discovered a large number of vehicles that were not taxed previously that are going to be added to our roll book this year, which is going to increase our overall dollar amount. So it will look higher than the 5%, but that's not because we haven't provided an appropriate amount of relief. It's because we have picked up a number of vehicles that weren't previously taxed. And that kind of goes back to something we've talked about in the past, which is a lot of our partners at the state, our DMVs and our state income tax, state sales tax, accept self-reporting. So when someone says they live in Williamsburg, the DMV doesn't often know to ask if they're in York County, James City County, or the city of Williamsburg. Okay. So they're incorrectly registered to us or to another locality.
So it's astounding that in 1 year, these values have increased by about 5 times and now by 10 times over the last 2 years, and housing is there by 3 times. So
Right.
It really is a great increase. I think it's commendable for the city to be considering a reduction in some of the tax bases. So thank you for providing the numbers behind that.
Absolutely. And I do look forward to watching the news on this and to see where the assessments, and we will probably get another update from NADA at the end of the year, letting us know if they anticipate the assessments to continue to rise, or if the problem has in fact resolved, so we can have that discussion again next year if it's warranted.
Just to follow up, I'm sorry. In the past, don't vehicles normally depreciate every year?
Correct. But you
Or
go up 5% because people get rid of old vehicles and buy new vehicles.
Right, so the overall value of what's in inventory in the city has gone up, but typically, cars depreciate every year.
Correct.
Anybody want to buy them? No, just, thank you again.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you giving us the time and the thoughtful consideration to help us make these decisions.
Absolutely, thank you.
Takes us now to City Council communications.
Well, I don't think he's finished.
Wishful
Still got
thinking.
more budget stuff?
Wishful thinking, Mr. Mayor, wishful thinking. But I will be as quick as possible. All right, so what do we accomplish with this budget? Four major things. The first is we're funding major capital expenses. We're going to show you a list in a second. This includes things like diversifying our economy by investing in return on investment type projects, particularly the sports center is an example. Funding for renewed infrastructure. We're all familiar with the major capital projects that we have on the horizon, the library, the police station, and the fire station, and a renovated or reconstructed Blayton building at some point in the future. Competitive compensation. We spent a lot of time talking about this at the April meeting and how we needed to do a better job with our pay plan. This budget invests heavily in that. And of course, deals with the federal assistance that we've been lucky enough to receive throughout the course of COVID, and better allows us to deploy that, which allows us to make some of these changes to this year's budget. So some of the budget drivers: increased revenues. We just heard about some, particularly real estate and personal property, and also the federal relief funds. And one of the major changes that occurred between the financial retreat and today is the finalization of the rules for how we can use ARPA. And we were able to get some additional flexibility. I'm going to show you how that money will work and how it's being used to provide relief to the taxpayers. Increased expenses, though, balance out those increased revenues pretty effectively. Recruitment and retention, that's investing in our pay plan. Virginia retirement system, mandated increases there. Health insurance, the health insurance plan for the city goes up just like private insurance does. And, of course, additional school costs. So the special fund section of the budget, this covers the CIP fund particularly. You can see here $46.6 million. That's the majority of the increase in the overall budget. And here's a list of some of the major projects that are, of course, included. The police station, school construction and expansions, possibility of an amphitheater, the research village, Triangle building redevelopment, affordable housing, and improvements to city parks. So these are all things that were part of GIOs or otherwise covered by ARPA funding retreat. And we're going to talk about the ARPA fund in just a second. A major component of the CIP is that's where we fund our debt service. And as we think about this large list of infrastructure projects, we're not going to be able to do that without leveraging debt to our advantage. So let's just take a minute to look at that. I'm not going to go through this in tremendous detail. You saw a version of this at the financial retreat. It has been revised by Davenport, our financial advisor, to show you at least one scenario for how we get to A to B on that list of projects. And it does include two separate borrowings, one planned for FY23, which will allow us to take advantage of what we hope to be low interest rates, and then again another borrowing in 27, which will finish off that project list. There's some gap financing included that's represented by the line of credit. At the bottom is sort of the major takeaways of the message, and that is, what does this do to our overall debt profile, and how does that impact what our bond rating might be? The city is particularly proud of its higher than average bond rating for a city our size, and we don't want to jeopardize that, because ultimately that translates to cost savings as we do borrow money. So a couple of things that are important is debt to assessed values and debt service to expenditures, and then underneath that you can see the ratios that Moody's considers as they assign a credit rating. Now, of course, the Moody's criteria is extensive, and these are only two small variables. So even though in the case of debt to assessed values, we are going to slip a little bit from the strong category to the moderate category, it's likely offset by our continued commitment to a healthy reserve. So continuing on with the special funds, the ARPA fund, we want to just take a few minutes and show you how this money is going to transition. This process will actually begin at Thursday's meeting. We've got some public hearings that start the process of flowing this money in this fashion. So we start with FY22, where we received half of the ARPA funding, and it will transition out of the ARPA fund into the general fund. We also move the COVID contingency fund that we had received earlier in the COVID pandemic of $3 million to the FY22 CIP as well. And then the same thing happens in 23. We transition ARPA to offset funds in the general fund, and then those general funds are released to the CIP. The combination of those two things, while it seems very simple in a cleverly animated graphic, is pretty complex, but the end result is it's allowing us to fund what I consider to be an exceptional budget that funds major capital expenses as well as offers this taxpayer relief. We wanted to take just a second and talk about Tourism Fund because it has been instrumental during COVID to help us soften the blow of revenue loss. And so what you can see here is the FY21 General Fund reserves and the FY21 Tourism Reserve. And the major function is that we relied heavily on the Tourism Reserve to offset what we would pull out of the General Fund Reserve to weather the COVID storm. Now that proved to be an outstanding strategy on the part of Ms. Dameron because what it did was it translated to FY22 where we had to rely heavily on the General Fund Reserve. And so it really allowed us to maintain that 35% balance that is so critical to being prepared for an emergency. So how does this translate to FY23? As you can see here, we are expecting $4.7 million in tourism expenditures, which will leave a surplus in tourism revenue of $300,000. That will translate into the Tourism Development Grant Fund. As you can see in FY21, that development grant fund was $3 million. We had a surplus in that year, or in 22, of $1.6 million, and then we had to commit previous awards from the grant process of $3 million, which leaves us with a balance of $1.6. To that, we will add the $300,000 that's forecasted for the end of FY23, and we'll close out FY23 with a balance in the grant program of $1.9 million. So then utility, it's important for us to talk about this one because this is one of those funds that we keep an eye on, particularly as we see consumption decrease, which affects the bottom line of providing the service. And so in the text there, one of the notes is that a future increase to utility rates is not out of the question. Every year it seems like we're telling you that it's next year. It could very well be next year. It could be 2 years from now, but there's certainly on the horizon an increase in utility rates. Not a substantial increase, a modest increase that will help us keep pace with cost. So what's included in the budget? We've already talked about a lot about it. The major driver outside of those capital projects is changes in personnel, particularly as we deal with salaries and compensation packages. And so the 8.5% total increase almost is entirely due to those changes. As we change salaries, of course, so do the benefit costs. And then, of course, there's mandated increases like the health insurance costs that we showed you, as well as VRS. So breaking it down a little bit further, one of the questions that we get a lot is how is the size of government growing? This shows you that 7 new FTEs are being added to the budget, and that's not exactly true. 5 of those are conversions of part-time positions to full-time positions, and 4.5 of those conversions are actually mandated by VRS requirements. So really, there's only 2 new positions included in this proposal. So what's not included, really this is, like I said, one of my favorite slides because it gives you a good sense of what we should be thinking about for next year. This year is a little bit different because of a couple of reasons. Number one is the true school capacity expansion costs. In the CIP, we have been budgeting for years for what we think will be an expansion project in the school system. We didn't know exactly what that was going to look like. Now we sort of have a picture of what it might be, and it could be an expansion of the pre-K program. What we don't know is what will the cost be. Because the project is still in its infancy, we don't have bids, we have no real costing information. So in our budget, I think we are basing our contribution on a $21 million project, but it's very likely that it'll cost more than that. If the project evolves to be an elementary school, it will be substantially more. Just recently, I was at a CAO meeting in Isle of Wight County. They are building a 900-student elementary school, and the cost came in at $40 million instead of the $27 million they had budgeted. So they had to return to the bond market to fully fund the project. So as we move forward through the year, we need to be thinking about the fact that that project is underfunded in the CIP, and any cost savings from projects or new funding that is made available in the CIP should definitely go to bolstering what we have budgeted for it. Inflation costs, we really had hoped to improve the contingencies that are in various parts of the budget so that we could deal with inflationary costs of the services that we have to purchase. You can think about the city is no different than any other budget. We buy tires, we buy oil, we buy gas, and as those costs increase in the private sector, they increase for the public sector. And so it's hard to keep up with that at current pace. We would have liked to have added some contingency to deal with that throughout the year. As we talked about, we did a substantial increase to the public sector, or the public safety side of government's funding plan. We adjusted the pay plan there by over $1 million, and it's been exceptionally well received. It immediately cured our issues with recruitment and seems to be addressing retention as well. So thank you again for allowing us to do that in April instead of making us wait to July. So now we are working on the general government equivalent of that. We have a standing committee that is currently going through each position and evaluating it for competitiveness in the market. That will result in a recommendation of what we need to change. And then to that, we will apply the money that's already in the budget that we usually use for cost of living increases and merit increases to make some of those adjustments, as many as possible, as well as consider a cost of living increase for those that don't get a competitiveness increase associated with this adjustment. Now, if you read the budget message, this is another area where we feel like we're underfunded in this budget. It'd be really nice if we could accomplish it all in this fiscal year, because this is intended to be a 2-year cycle for this standing committee in the hopes that as that committee meets every 2 years, it reduces our investment year over year in this. And it also helps us to keep pace competitively as opposed to having to make that big bite all at one time. As we move through the process of evaluating how far we can go with the money that's in the budget, we'll try to do as much as we can, but as I say, we anticipate that will be a 2-phase process. Unknown state funding plans, it's sort of an unusual circumstance for us to be at this point in the budget process for localities and still not have a statewide budget, and we don't know exactly how that will impact our revenues. There are certainly plans that are included on both sides of that budget that could impact the money that we have to spend, and if it does come to fruition that one of those options passes, we may have to come back and do a revised budget that addresses that. And then, of course, any revised revenue estimates, particularly as it relates to the state budget that might come out and where to place those. As I said, as we do revise revenue estimates over the next month, any additional revenue, there are 2 places that money could go. If it's in the CIP, certainly it can go to the underfunded school capacity project, and in the general fund, saved money or new revenues should definitely be applied to that phase 2 process for general government pay plan adjustment. In the end, those 2 investments will save us money in the next fiscal year. So the future, what do we need to be worried about? What do we need to be thinking about? We need to think about revenue shortfalls. Certainly, that's a trend we've seen. And as we exit COVID, there's certainly been an increase in revenues in particular lines. How long will that continue? Is it going to be sustained? We just don't know. Inflation and interest rates are certainly going to have an effect on that as people have less and less expendable income. Possibility of a recession. You know, one of the things that a lot of economists are talking about is the artificially high housing market and the fact that some of those people are going to find that they have overinvested in a home as interest rates climb and fewer people can afford a higher price. Consumer confidence and salaries are going to continue to be an issue. Certainly at the CAO level, every single locality in Hampton Roads is considering some type of adjustment to their compensation package. And so I think that's going to continue in the next year as well as people try to catch up and continue to retain the best talent. So things to consider, I think we've got to maintain our commitment to our fiscal reserve. Obviously, we've proven that during COVID, its importance. You never know what emergency is going to be right around the corner. And also, it's part of Williamsburg's success. I think it's one of the reasons that Williamsburg is the envy of local governments across the country, is that we have such a commitment to fiscal stabilization. And then the stabilization lines, you know, that's one of the things that we have talked about a lot in the past years is making sure that we are budgeting for those major expenses as we are aware of them. And so we added stabilization lines to the CIP particularly to deal with school projects. And that's come in very handy as we've applied those balances, even though they've been small, to those major projects to soften the blow in that fiscal year. And then making sure that we invest when we can. And that's really been our strategy with ARPA and federal relief funds. We went through sort of a unique public process for local government and considering what to do with that so that we really considered return on investment projects as opposed to just spending the money and then not having much to show for it in the end. And so that brings us to this quote by Benjamin Franklin: "Without continual growth and progress, such words as improvement, achievement, and success have no meaning." And that's really sort of a theme of this budget. If you look at the pictures, you may wonder where we get these ideas. The theme here was looking up. We're at the crest of a hill, and we've got the other side to consider. If you read the budget message last year, we talked about this article from the Accounting Association, and it talked about bridging, transforming, and reforming, and that's where we are. We're at the end of the bridge now, and we can see where we're going, and this budget really represents a reformation of our budget process, so that we can be prepared for the transformation that occurs in future years. And the last point I wanted to make is, how can you be involved in the budget? The public has plenty of opportunities still to comment. April 14th, we will have the public hearings that were advertised. On May the 9th, we have the work session, another opportunity to talk to the city council about the budget. And then on May the 12th, the regular meeting, we hope the city council will be prepared to adopt it. We're happy to answer any questions.
So now I can move on to council
Yes,
communication.
now we're done. Now you can adjourn the meeting.
Well, Andrew, I appreciate the presentation, and I think this year I particularly appreciate the opportunity to work somewhat collaboratively with you. As you pointed out, this is the city manager's budget, but I think with some of the extenuating circumstances that we're faced with and have the opportunity to deal with, i.e. ARPA funds and increased revenue through other sources, you bringing council along to get a sense of where we want to go with this budget, and ultimately, in working with the Commissioner of Revenue, making the recommendations to make some cuts while protecting the future of the city and delivering the quality service and protecting our reserve policy. I think you have presented a good budget. So I know we have lots of opportunities to talk on that. As you point out here, next three meetings, the council will be an opportunity for council members to weigh in more and ask some more questions, and certainly feel free to do that today. But certainly the public can be engaged at these three meetings or with us individually. Our phone numbers are posted on the website, or email address, so please feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Mr. Trivette, appreciate the presentation, and more importantly, as the mayor pointed out, working with city council to present this budget and the tax reductions that I think are extremely important for the community. And for answering my questions through the budget process, because I had a lot of them. And I did want to, two things I would ask you if you could comment on. Was one of the things that we're often asked about is you're adding more positions, you're adding more staff. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the two new positions, not the 7 conversions, but the 2 new positions that were being added.
Sure, absolutely. So one of those positions is a financial reporting position in the finance department. That person will have some accounting expertise, but will be more focused on software and using our financial system to provide reports that we would use internally. This is not about providing more information to the public. This is about making sure that we can take the fullest advantage of what is a very expensive piece of software that manages all the city's financial accounting data. We are spending an inordinate amount of time generating reports, and when I say reports, an example is the budget itself. Over 400 pages of data there, and having this person would definitely reduce the amount of time that Ms. Dameron is spending in the office after hours. I challenge anybody, drive by, take a survey on your own. Ms. Dameron works later than anybody in local government. I would bet that without even taking my own data. So this person will help take the load off. It's also following up on, we continue to try and follow up on a comment that the auditor makes every single year, and that is you need more staff in finance to shoulder the load. And part of that is we need to do a better job of cross-training people so that when we lose somebody, it's not a real loss in who's handling that particular information. This person will help us diffuse that a little bit. And then the second position is one It was a city council GIO that we expand the youth program that's offered by Human Services. And while we can add people to do the youth programming, we need somebody who's there to coordinate all of that work. And so this person would be a youth program coordinator in Human Services. So those are the only two new positions.
Thank you, and I think it's important, I know I question you on this for my own knowledge, but once you explain, providing compliance reporting, a budget of this magnitude, but more importantly, our auditors recommended this for some time, and we've now reached a point where we can add that position to provide some additional assistance in finance. The other thing that I wanted to bring forward was, I know in some of our conversations we talked about, you showed some figures in the out years in the CIP where we might not be meeting the goal and we're falling a little bit short. And really some of those, many of those, we've got a lot of big projects in the pipeline that we hope are going to be in the pipeline, but many of those CIP projects are placeholders and will be discussed at a further time. I know one of the ones that the mayor and I brought up specifically was the renovating the third floor of the municipal building was in a FY23 CIP, when in reality we know the fire station's not going to be completed in FY23. So, but that's just an example of all of those CIP projects in future years are still up for consideration as we get to those years, and maybe we at that time we would have to push some of those out, or maybe even eliminate some to make sure that we're still financially stable and paying for the projects as we go and not finding ourselves in that structural imbalance that you often talk about.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And, in the case of so this particular CIP is a little bit different than past years because there are 2 borrowings forecasted during the 5-year term. And the thing about borrowing the money for those projects is you really can place the cost of the project in any of those fiscal years, and it's not going to change the bottom line of the CIP because it's borrowed money. You'd have to cut a whole host of projects to impact the amount of debt service associated with what you're borrowing. So in the case of the third floor, I think that's a good example to give of how a project sort of evolves. One of the things that we know is that it's now time for us to start looking at using the third floor for the purpose that it was designed, and that is housing the expansion of our municipal building. We really need to make room on the first floor for Human Services. You asked about FTEs, and I've talked a lot about how this budget sort of represents us at the precipice of a hill, and I think that we are in a lot of ways, and one of those ways is staffing levels. I don't foresee a huge request for staffing in a bunch of departments year over year moving forward. I really think that as we think about the next 4 or 5 years, the only place we're really going to be asking for staffing is likely going to be in finance as needs arise, but particularly in Human Services, just because I think the council's expecting us to do more, and I think that there is certainly a greater and growing need in the Human Services Department. Right now, in fact, we already have employees in Human Services that have shared offices as well as working in hallways. And from a standpoint of, you've heard me talk, especially this year, a lot about what goes into the decision to stay employed with local government. Your work environment is a major factor. And so we need to address that again, because Williamsburg really counts on having the best and brightest as our employees. And it's hard to do that when the work environment doesn't match the expectation. So we're going to borrow the money while interest rates are low, begin investigating that third floor expansion, and as we do that work, we may find that it's not feasible to house everything that we need to on the third floor, and we have to drop back and look at another option, in which case we would not use that funding that we've borrowed.
Thank you. And the last thing I had was just a comment. I hope that you pointed it out and what's not included, but I hope we find a way to make those general government salary adjustments so that we can retain the talented staff that we have.
Yeah, we're going to make an adjustment for sure. It's just a question of how deep into the committee's recommendations we can get with the money that we have, as well as offer some type of cost of living for the folks that don't get an adjustment as a result of that competitiveness review. Because the cost of living this year, according to the federal government, is over 6%. And so to ignore it just causes those positions that don't get a competitiveness adjustment to further fall behind. And so ideally, we're able to do a little bit of both, and we're still evaluating how far we can go with the money that we have in the budget.
And I did have, that wasn't my last one, I had one more, but it's not another question, it's just a comment that I do appreciate the letter to the community. I know in the people that have spoken to me, it's all been positive feedback. So I think this is 2 years in a row that, or 2 budget cycles in a row that the community's received that similar letters, and I think they've been very well received.
Thank you.
Yeah, I concur with the Vice Mayor's comments, especially with the huge CIP plan. Looking at those capital projects, a lot of the public, I think, is going to be shocked by the magnitude of that. And we do need to explain that those are placeholders at this point, that every project's going to have to come back to City Council for approval before it moves forward. Also, with the ARPA funds, when we first saw what we were getting with the ARPA funds, Barbara had estimated that maybe $9 million of that we could justify as revenue replacement, and now we've got the flexibility to almost use all of it. And that also helps us with the CIP plan, because we can actually push those projects out further than the deadlines that would have been there for the federal government, and we also don't have that big auditing requirement. So that's really good news there. And we can be more thoughtful of what we're actually going to do there. One comment, though, in terms of in terms of selling the bonds. So I think one of my meetings back that I was attending in the audience back in 2017 was when the previous city manager was suggesting that we expand the police station where it is now. And I got up in the audience, not intending to speak, but said, hey, City Council really needs to look at objectives. I mean, alternates. This is a 40-year decision. Maybe expanding the police station right here and taking more parking away from the library is not the best solution. But then the next thing I know, we were selling bonds. So I think it's really important that before we sell bonds, that City Council is actually buying into what projects the bonds will be used for. Thank you.
Thank you for the budget presentation, and as my colleagues have said, for the opportunity to just discuss with you and staff how you came about it. I too think that the letter was excellent. I've heard from many people that they felt the same way, and I think now you're sort of stuck with this new tradition of a letter each budget cycle. And I also appreciate the fact that we can continue with the GIOs and the vision that the City Council created for Williamsburg to move us forward and have transformation as in the years ahead of us. I did want to ask a follow-up question to the Vice Mayor about the FTEs. You said that I think 5 of them are conversions because of VRS mandates. Could you explain that a little, please?
Sure. So there are 5 conversions in this budget from part-time positions to full-time positions. One of those you approved a few months ago. We've actually filled the position now, and that's the graphic designer, which we have to thank for this beautiful PowerPoint. It's not a Drew special. It's actually done by somebody that knew what they were doing. And then the other 4.5, though, are positions that we had already had employed as part-time positions, and VRS said you can't continue to calculate the retirement the way that you have been, and so that forced us to convert them to full-time positions because that was the only benefit that they weren't getting as part-time employees.
I see.
And so they all happen to be in human services, and so the easiest thing for us to do was just to convert them to full-time.
And also, when we were talking about reporting for finance, won't there be a lot of reports necessary with the ARPA funding?
Yes, absolutely, and that's a good example of the compliance reporting that Mr. Dent was talking about. Reporting continues to be a major time consumption for us in finance. Just the COVID monies alone, I would hate to guess at how many reports we have sent in on what we're doing with the money, even already before we've spent much of it.
And I agree that cross-training is extremely important. I think that the city has recognized the need for that when it has not been prevalent in other departments. So I think that is good across the board. And also the realization that human services staff will need to increase. I mean, there's a lot of need in the community, and we've got a great staff there to help with all of those residents. So thank you.
And I echo every comment that's been said. We've talked at length now, and I feel like all my questions have been answered. So my only comment would be the very lengthy budget, I think, is distilled very well into this PowerPoint, and that you may have signed yourself up for a new tradition of the letter, but it's commendable in both the case of needing to increase the tax rate or where we are now and lowering it, that we send out over 5,000 letters to the community to let them know. So main takeaways for me, or the public will have 3 more times to comment on this, and we'll hope to hear them in a couple days or in May.
Thank you again. So
Yeah, thank you.
it's in the community's hands, so let's hear from you if you have any comments. All right, so it takes us now to item 5, council communications. Okay. Schedule of meetings is in your agenda. It's also online, so the public can review it. There's several items over the next month, which takes us to open forum, which is again another opportunity for anybody in the public that wishes to come forward to speak. Let you raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll close the open forum and motion.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.